Hey Rayleigh, and anybody else watching, and welcome back to another message from your father. So 2 Kings 16 and 17. Yesterday we took a look at a lot of different Israelite kings and Judean kings, and today we are going to look at two additional kings. So King Ahaz and also King Hoshea. Beyond that, we will see Israel's exile and then Samaria's resettlement. And we'll talk about some of the interesting things we're going to see. It involves lions. Anyway, pretty cool stuff. 16 and 17 today. So, chapter 16. In the 17th year of Pekah, son of Ramaliah, Ahaz, son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Unlike David, his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord his God. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel and even sacrificed his son in the fire, following the detestable ways of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burnt incense on the high places, on the hilltops, and under every spreading tree. Then Rezin, king of Aram, and Pekah, son of Ramaliah, king of Israel, marched up to fight against Jerusalem and besieged Ahaz, but they could not overpower him. At that time, Rezin, king of Aram, recovered Elath for Aram by dividing out the men of Judah. Edomites then moved into Elath and have lived there to this day. Ahaz sent messengers to say to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, "I am your servant and vessel. Come up and save me out of the hand of the king of Aram and the king of Israel, who are attacking me." And Ahaz took the silver and gold found in the temple of the Lord and in the treasuries of the royal palace and sent it as a gift to the king of Assyria. The king of Assyria complied by attacking Damascus and capturing it. He deported its inhabitants to Kir and put Rezin to death. Then King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria. He saw an altar in Damascus and sent to Uriah the priest to sketch the altar, which detailed plans for its construction. So Uriah the priest built an altar in accordance with all the plans that King Ahaz had sent from Damascus, and finished it before King Ahaz returned. When the king came back to Damascus and saw the altar, he approached it and presented offerings on it. He offered up his burnt offering and grain offering, poured out his drink offering, and sprinkled the blood of his fellowship offering on the altar. The bronze altar that stood before the Lord he brought from the front of the temple, from between the new altar and the temple of the Lord, and put it on the north side of the new altar. King Ahaz then gave these orders to Uriah the priest. On the large new altar, offer the morning burnt offering, and the evening grain offering, the king's burnt offering, and his grain offering, and the burnt offering of all the people of the land, and their grain offering, and the drink offering. Sprinkle on the altar all the blood of the burnt offerings and sacrifices, but I will use the bronze altar for seeking guidance. And Uriah the priest did just as King Ahaz had ordered. King Ahaz took away the side panels and removed the basins and movable stands. He removed the sea from the bronze bowls that supported it and set it on a stone base. He took away the Sabbath canopy that had been built at the temple and removed the royal entryway outside the temple of the Lord in deference to the king of Assyria. As for the other events of the reign of Ahaz and what he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? Ahaz rested with his fathers and was buried with them in the city of David. And Hezekiah, his own son, succeeded him as king. Chapter 17. In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, Hoshea son of Elah became king of Israel in Samaria, and he reigned 9 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, but not like the kings of Israel who preceded him. Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up to attack Hoshea, who had been Shalmaneser's vassal and paid tribute to him. But the king of Assyria discovered that Hoshea was a traitor, for he had sent envoys to So, king of Egypt, and he no longer paid tribute to the king of Assyria as he had done year by year. Therefore, Shalmaneser seized him and put him in prison. The king of Assyria invaded the entire land, marched against Samaria, and laid siege to it for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and deported the Israelites to Assyria. He settled them in Halah, in Gozan on the Habor River, and in the towns of the Medes. All this took place because of the Israelites who had sinned against the Lord their God, who brought them up out of Egypt, from under the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. They worshipped other gods and followed the practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before them, as well as the practices of the kings of Israel had introduced. The Israelites secretly did things against the Lord their God that were not right. From watchtower to fortified city, they built themselves high places in all their towns. They set up sacred stones and Asherah poles on every high hill and under every spreading tree. At every high place they burned incense, as the nations whom the Lord had driven out from before them had done. They did wicked things that provoked the Lord to anger. They worshipped idols. The Lord had said, "You shall not do this." The Lord warned Israel and Judah through all the prophets and seers, "Turn away from your evil ways. Observe my commands and decrees in accordance with the entire law that I commanded your fathers to obey, and that I delivered to you through my servants, the prophets." But they would not listen and were stiff-necked as their fathers, who did not trust in the Lord their God. They rejected his decrees and the covenant he had made with their fathers and the warnings he had given them. They followed worthless idols and themselves became worthless. They imitated the nations around them, although the Lord had directed them, "Do not do as they do." And they did all the things that the Lord had forbidden them to do. They forsook all the commands of the Lord their God and made themselves two idols, cast in the shape of calves, and an Asherah pole. They bowed down to all the starry hosts and they worshipped Baal. They sacrificed their sons and daughters on the fire. They practiced divination and sorcery and sold themselves to do evil in the eyes of the Lord, provoking him to anger. So the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them from his presence. Only the tribe of Judah was left, and even Judah did not keep the commands of the Lord their God. They followed the practices Israel had introduced. Therefore, the Lord rejected all the people of Israel. He afflicted them and gave them into the hands of plunderers until he thrust them from his presence. When he tore Israel away from the house of David, they made Jeroboam, son of Nebat, their king. Jeroboam enticed Israel away from following the Lord and caused them to commit a great sin. The Israelites persisted in all the sins of Jeroboam and did not turn away from them until the Lord removed them from his presence, as he had warned through all his servants, the prophets. So the people of Israel were taken from their homeland into exile in Assyria, and they are still there. The king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Kuhath, Avah, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and settled them in the towns of Samaria to replace the Israelites. They took over Samaria and lived in its towns. When they first lived there, they did not worship the Lord, so he sent lions among them and killed some of the people. It was reported to the king of Assyria, "The people you deported and resettled in the towns of Samaria do not know what God that country requires. He has sent lions among them, which are killing them off because the people do not know what he requires." Then the king of Assyria gave this order: "Have one of the priests you took captive from Samaria go back to live there and teach the people what the God of the land requires." So one of the priests who had been exiled from Samaria came to live in Bethel and taught them how to worship the Lord. Nevertheless, each group made its own gods in several towns where they settled and set them up in the shrines the people of Samaria had made at the high places. The men from Babylon made near Succoth-Benoth, the men from Kuhath made Nergal, and the men from Hamath made Ashima. The Avites made Nibhaz and Tartak, and the Sepharvaites burned their children in the fire as sacrifices to Adrammelech and Anamelech, the gods of the Seraphim. They worshipped the Lord, but they also appointed all sorts of their own people to officiate for them as priests in the shrines at the high places. They worshipped the Lord, but they also served their own gods, in accordance with the customs of the nations from which they had been brought. To this day they persist in their former practices. They neither worship the Lord nor adhere to the decrees and ordinances, the laws and the commandments that the Lord gave their descendants of Jacob, whom he named Israel. When the Lord made a covenant with the Israelites, he commanded them, "Do not worship any other gods, or bow down to them, serve them, or sacrifice to them. But the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt with a mighty power and an outstretched arm is the one you must worship. To him you shall bow down and offer sacrifices. You must always be careful to keep the decrees and ordinances, the laws and commands he wrote for you. Do not worship other gods. Do not forget the covenant I have made with you, and do not worship other gods. Rather worship the Lord your God. It is he who will deliver you from the hand of your enemies." They would not listen, however, but persisted in their former practices. Even while these people were worshiping the Lord, they were serving their idols. To this day, their children and grandchildren continue to do as their fathers did. It's really sobering, and I know I've mentioned that before, but it's really easy to get onto the Israelites and see all that God has done for them, and then see just a couple generations later how much they have forsaken the Lord. And it's it's frustrating. And I think that frustration is compounded by the fact that we aren't a whole lot different from the Israelites. I mean, if you're really thinking about it, it's just we're struggling and fighting and warring against our humanity, our human nature, versus relinquishing all power and glory and authority to God. I mean, he already has all power and glory and authority, so why are we not recognizing that? And I'm speaking to myself as much as anybody on that. The thing that I thought was interesting with the alliance was it's so interesting that even this other king that didn't serve God or recognize him still recognized the power of God and recognized that, hey, something is going amiss here. And it's really interesting because that pride, even back then, allowed this king who didn't worship the God of the Israelites to recognize that there was authority and power there. And I think, again, even though he didn't believe, it's interesting compounding that or contrasting that with people today, myself included, who fight pride. But it is interesting, though, that people will deny for so long the power of God. I mean, and they'll deny the power of Jesus as well, even using his name in vain, which is so interesting. Because if you don't believe in Jesus, or you believe that Jesus was not God, why use his name as a swear word, as a curse? Why would you do that if some part of you doesn't recognize? And I think that's part of the culture as well, is recognizing that there is authority and there is power in this name on some level, and their pride allowing them to deny that. My prayer for you is that you would recognize that and humble yourself. And it will be a constant humbling, but know that I am there for you and I'm praying for you, and wishing you the very, very best, really. Anybody else is watching, know, as always, that I appreciate you as well, and we'll plan on seeing you tomorrow. Have a good one.